Hi, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to HUM 205, Diversity and Culture. My name is Franklin Harvey, and I'm your instructor for the course. And I notice we have two people on right now, Tish and Jonathan. You know what? You should be able to see, if you want me to see you, you should be able to click on your screen where your name is, and then in the top right-hand side, there will be a menu. You see three dots across there. You should be able to click on that and then go down, and there should be says start video, and you can click on that, and then I would be able to see you. There we go. I see Jonathan got his working. And Tish, if you'd want to do that too, if you want me to be able to see you. And also you'll note, there you go. Good job. I see that your microphones are also muted. If you want to talk and ask me a question and interact in the lecture, what you can do is press down on your space bar, hold it down. You should see a yellow line then at the bottom, and then you can talk. And then when you're done, just let it up and you'll go back onto mute. So, you know what, Jonathan, since I can see you, why don't you try that and let's just make sure it works.
Yeah, it should be working now.
Okay, good. I could hear you fine. So that's what you want to do if you want to talk and interact in the lecture, and I hope you'll do that, because that makes it a lot more interesting than me just sitting here and talking to you in a small screen. Okay. I just wanted to mention you had a chance to read my introductory post. You know a little bit about me. And what I like to do is at the beginning of each session, each term, is to give you a chance to ask me a question if you'd like to know anything about me or anything in particular about the class. Because I know sometimes that introductory post doesn't do as much as it should. So if you have any questions you'd like to ask me, really about anything, it doesn't matter, I'd be glad to answer them.
No, I don't have too many questions.
Yeah, I'm good on questions too.
Okay, that's fine. All right, so I want to start out with two stories. One is there was a young man, and he was working in a dry goods store. Okay, let's in the Midwest. It's the late 1800s, and the lady comes in, and he just started working there, so he's new, and he's talking to this lady. And the boss is watching to see how he's doing and stuff, how he's interacting. And so the boss decides he's going to walk by and listen for a little bit. And just as he walks by, the conversation is ending. And he hears the young man saying to the lady, no, we haven't had any of that for a long time. And I don't think we're going to be getting any. And so they end the conversation, and she starts to leave. And the owner goes up to the young man, and he says, hey, he says, never ever say that we don't have something. He says, if it's not here, never say it's not coming in. He said, always tell somebody that it's on order and it'll be here soon. So he hurries up and he runs up and he stops the lady and he says, what was it that you wanted? What was it that you wanted? He said, we're going to be getting some of that soon, I'm sure. And she just looked at him, turned away, and left. So she goes over to the young man and she says, hey, she says, what did she want? And what did you tell her we don't have and we wouldn't be getting any of? And he said, rain. Okay, so the idea there is that the manager was looking at what was going on through one particular lens. And he didn't have the full story. He didn't know everything that he needed to know. So, and that's what this course hopefully will do, is to help you not to just look at something through one lens only, but to have a much broader outlook and not to jump so much to conclusions real quick about things. Now, that's a story you can find anywhere on the internet, okay? But I want to tell you a true story. When I was little, in the house I grew up in, my mother always made for breakfast on the weekends eggs for easy. It's the only kind of egg she would make. Never sunny side up, never scrambled, nothing else. So she would call us to come in to eat, and sometimes I wouldn't go in right away. And I'd get in there and the yolks would be hard. And I'd say, hey, Mom, I'd say, how come these yolks are hard? And she'd say, well, because it took you too long to get in here. So, I mean, that's what Mom said. It must be true, right? So every time I went in to eat and the yolks were hard, my mom said they're hard because it took you too long to get in here to eat. Well, believe it or not, she probably told me that before I was in first grade. And I didn't know that that wasn't the truth until I was married and I was 25 years old. And my wife made over easy eggs and the yolks were hard. And I was sitting there at the table when she brought them over. And I said, hey, how come these yolks are hard? I said, you just took them off the pan. I've been here waiting to eat them. And she said, well, because the yolks broke whenever I turned the eggs over. And all of a sudden I realized that all my life I've been believing something because it was something I was told when I was a young child. And I believed that until I was 25 years old. And when it comes to diversity, culture, the humanities, a lot of times, that's what's going on in our lives. We've heard something about this particular group, these particular people, this particular country, and, it's something we just believe all our lives because it's something we heard when we were young or something we've heard all of our lives. And it's maybe not necessarily true. So in this 5 weeks, hopefully we'll be able to develop a larger picture so that won't happen to us whenever we're talking about different cultures and we're talking about different identities. So, whoops. There we go. Okay, sometimes people say, well, I don't have a culture. Well, that's not true. We all have a culture. And if the introductory posts are any indication so far, everyone in the class definitely identifies with a particular culture. We've had people have identified as Panamanian, Mexican, Canadian, I identify as Italian, Filipino, African American, Roman Catholic, Christian. So everybody does have a culture. So if somebody ever says, oh man, I don't have a culture, well, they really do. They just don't want to admit it. Okay, cultural identity. I just want to read through this because it's from a reference work and it's something that we should know. Okay, cultural identity. The definition of groups or individuals by themselves or others in terms of cultural or subcultural categories. Okay, next. In one sense, cultural identity can be understood as the experience, enactment, and negotiation of dynamic social identifications by group members within particular settings. All right. Now, these next two are important. As an individual identifies with or desires acceptance into multiple groups, people tend to experience, enact, or negotiate not just one cultural identity at a time, but often multiple cultural identities at once. Further, how one experiences his or her intersecting cultural identities with others can vary from context to context, depending on the setting, the issue at hand, the people involved, etc. Ultimately, the study of cultural identities offers rich understanding for both oneself and others. Okay. The important thing here is in the third paragraph, okay, is that we all have more than one cultural identity. We probably all have one that we consider our primary identity, but then we have others that are secondary. And also talks here about experiencing and acting or negotiating. You know, not every cultural identity that we have is easy to fit into. For example, one post, someone's talked about their cultural identity, and then they said, but I'm not really sure about it, and I'm not really sure how I fit in, and I'm still learning a lot about it. And sometimes we have to negotiate ourselves into a culture. For example, I grew up, and I'm going to use a lot of examples about myself because that's what I know about. I grew up in a large Italian family. My mother, both her parents were from Italy, and my dad, he never really said anything about his parents. They lived halfway across the country. We never really visited them, so I didn't know much about them. But my grandparents were from Italy, so both my mom's parents were from Italy, and every weekend we went down and we had a big family gathering there. And my parents and my grandparents, they wanted us to know that we were part of an Italian culture. So it was real easy for me to fit into that particular culture and to identify myself as a, I guess you would say, a second generation Italian American. Okay. But then later, you know, there were other cultures, groups that I wanted to fit into that I had to negotiate myself into them. I had to work to be a part of them. And anybody that's been in high school knows what I'm talking about. All right, does anybody have any questions so far, or any comments?
No.
It's all new to me. I'm just going along to understand and learn more.
Okay, okay. All right, so some national or some cultural identities that we have, there are three primary examples. There's national identity, okay, already we mentioned that, Italian, Canadian, Mexican, American, Middle Eastern, those are all national identities. Then there's gender identity. You know, today, you know, this is a cultural identity that's in a lot of flux. It seemed forever, you know, there were males and there were females, and you were born one way and you stayed that way for all of your life. And that's how you identified yourself. Okay, but that's not the case today. So gender identity is a cultural identity that's in a lot of flux, and it causes a lot of, I don't know if I want to say confusion. That's not really the right word, but it causes people to look at things in a new light, in a new way that they've never looked at things before. Okay, so gender identity is in a lot of flux. There's ethnic identity. Then these are listed as secondary examples here. Okay? Now, the first one is religion, belief, and spiritual identity. We'll talk about that later. But for me, I've taught. I went to a Bible college. Then I went to Indiana University of Pennsylvania, and I studied religious studies. I got a degree in religious studies and philosophy there. Then I went to the University of Pittsburgh, and I got a Master of Arts there, one in philosophy and one in religious studies. And I've been teaching religious studies, different religions, pretty much all of my teaching career. So for me, religion, belief, and spiritual identity, I wouldn't consider that a secondary example. I see most everything through a religious belief or spiritual identity prism. And then we have class socioeconomics. Are you middle, upper, middle, lower class? What exactly is that? Then you have your regional identity, organizational identity, and cyber fantasy identity. Okay, let's look at those in a little bit more detail here. Okay, ethnic identity, that comes from a heritage that we have, traditions, values, behaviors, origins, language. Okay, I was saying my ethnicity, the way one way I identify myself is as an Italian American. When I was young, that meant a whole lot to me, and that was very important to me. But as I've gotten older, that identity has become less and less important. Now, they have a amusement park near here, Kennywood Park. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of it, but they have an Italian day there, and I still like to go, and I'm Italian and go and be part of it. But that's part of my background, okay, my ethnic identity. Now, when we're talking about race, okay, this is important here. Race is a social construct arising from efforts to categorize people into different groups using their physical appearance. Okay, now, let me ask you a question. Suppose you're walking down the street and you see a person that looks like this little green person here in the middle of the screen there. And then you saw them and somebody asked you, hey, what race are they?
That's an alien.
Alien, okay? But you know what? See, how you wouldn't know how to answer that question really, because it would be the first time that you've seen someone that looked like that. So
I would call it an alien.
Pardon me?
I would call it an alien.
You would call it an alien, okay? They're from an alien race. But I guess what I'm getting at is right away, you're sort of putting someone in a box because of their appearance or their color. So race is not just because somebody looks a certain way or acts a certain way, doesn't necessarily mean that, that's the race that they identify with. All right, does anybody have any questions about that?
No.
No.
Okay, let me back up here. All right, now, earlier we mentioned gender identity. Okay, and that refers to how a particular culture differentiates between masculine and feminine social roles. And like I said, today, that is in a lot of flux. That's still sort of being, I don't know if you want to say determined, worked out. We're still trying to come to some kind of a consensus on that. Now, another important thing to realize is that culture and time influences just what beauty is and how it's displayed. And that differs across cultures and differs across time. For example, on the left-hand side of the screen, there are two. One at the top is a portrait, the bottom is a photo. And they're both supposed to represent Helen of Troy. Now, if anybody, if you have read any, let's say, ancient Greek literature, or you've read the Iliad or the Odyssey by Homer, Helen of Troy was supposed to be the most beautiful woman in the world and is known as the woman that launched 1,000 ships. Okay. But you can see here in these two photos that the first one is done in the early 1800s, and that's how this artist pictured the most beautiful woman in the world. Then, right below there is a picture of Helen of Troy from a movie that Warner Brothers made in the 1980s. Right? So about 150 years apart, and you can see how the idea of beauty changed over time. And that's something, again, that a lot of times is subjective to time, place, culture, those sorts of things. And then your national identity, your nationality, regional identity, there's smaller divisions of geographic areas, okay, cultural contrasts. Whenever I think of this, regions don't have to be large. Like sometimes we think of the northwest part of the United States or the southeast part of the United States. We think of those as regions, but they can even be smaller than that. For example, I come from Derry. It has a borough, and there's about 1,500 people in it. I live in Derry Township, which is outside of the borough. There's a couple thousand people that live there. But where I lived was called West Derry, and it was outside of Derry Borough proper. So when we would go into town, me and my friends, we were, hey, there's the boys from West Derry. We had our own regional identity. That's where we were from, West Derry. So, you might have that where you live. You might have that with, your group, and that might be how you identify yourself. Okay, does anybody have any questions about those three areas?
No.
All right.
No.
Okay. Organizational identity, that if you're in a, what they call them a collectivist culture, that can be very important. For example, like in Japan, when people identify themselves or introduce themselves, a lot of times, they'll say, hey, this is Joe, and Joe works for Nissan, and Joe is a designer at Nissan. And that's very important, and that's how people identify themselves in the Japanese culture. Now, here, we don't usually do something like that, but sometimes that can be very important. Like, my father worked in the steel mill, which in Pittsburgh, that was the big industry here, near here. He worked in the steel mill, and he was proud of that. So when he introduced himself, or he was introduced, he liked to make sure that people knew that, because that was how he identified himself. His work was his identity. Hey, also, people in the military tend to have a strong identification with that organization. Jonathan, I know that you are in the military.
Yep.
Would you want to say anything about that?
As far as identity for the military?
Yeah, like how important is that to you as your identity?
So being in the military for as long as I have, being all the places I've been, I've noticed that a lot of people are very, very strong to represent where they grew up, how they grew up, where they're from.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people I've noticed, depending on where they're from, tend to act the same. A lot of people come from Texas. So when you see a lot of people from New England, per se, like New Hampshire, Vermont, Mass, Connecticut,
Mm-hmm.
it's a whole different identifier for somebody because of the way we're raised, the whole cultural background, types of how we talk to each other, how we greet each other, how we interact. It's completely different. I've noticed that there is a lot that people really do emphasize where they're from and what it's like for them there growing up.
Okay, good. And one thing I noticed too from my teaching career, I've been teaching for about 20 years, and I know that people, when they come out of the military, and this particularly happens whenever I'm teaching a class in the classroom, is that they're very proud of their military service. And, they like to, I don't know if I want to say be identified in that way, but they're proud of it, and that definitely, you can tell that that's a major way that they identify themselves.
Yeah, I've seen that too. I've had a lot of friends over time who got out of the military, and a lot of people that they've interacted with have asked about their background, their history, and one of the number one things they'll mention is their military career, that their travels, what they've done, what they've accomplished. So in that aspect of it, I would definitely agree with you. Is their number one thing is they like to identify the fact that they are military.
Okay, good. All right, and then the last identity here is cyber fantasy identity. And, today, that can be a real identity that someone has. People build up this imaginary persona. I have this avatar, and these are my and then we act, and then they act like that, and they talk like that, and they build up that cyber fantasy identity. And we'll talk about that later. But one thing that does is it allows you to like build your own identity behind a wall of anonymity. So no one ever really knows who you are and what you're really like, so you can become whoever you want to be outside of the constraints of normal everyday life.
I actually have a friend that's he's been writing books now for a couple years, and he writes he writes what's called manga books.
Okay.
His collection that he's writing right now is actually it's actually kind of interesting that you're saying it like that, because I've never had it explained to me like this. So now I have a better understanding of it. The books that he writes about a girl who creates a complete different character on the internet from what she actually is. In her real life, she doesn't like to interact with people. She's afraid of interacting with people, doesn't like to be around people at all. And on the internet, her character that's on the internet is strong-willed, very powerful, and very interactive with everybody. It's actually, like I said, it's actually pretty interesting that you mentioned that, and a friend of mine's writing a collection like that.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. And like I said, you have that wall of anonymity. Nobody knows who you are, so you can be whoever you want to be. Right. Okay, and then like I said, this one to me is very important: the belief systems and identities. Like I said, I grew up Roman Catholic, went to church every week, went to CCD classes on Saturday. Went to 2-week CCD classes during the summer. Then whenever I graduated high school, I worked for about 10 years, and then I went back to school. And like I said, all my schooling has been in biblical studies or religious studies and philosophy. So this is how I see basically the entire world. Like, I keep up on all the religious news that's going on in the world. I get all these news feeds. So everything that I see happening out there has some type of a religious religious connotation to it. And this definitely, my belief system has definitely shaped my worldview. And like this says here in the second box, belief systems, as has been assumed at times, belief systems don't only pertain to a person's values, like what's right, what's wrong, how I should act, and what I should do, but instead, like it says here, it forms a worldview that can shape almost every aspect of everyday life, providing people with ultimate goals and means of achieving them. And like I said, I know for me, that is how my worldview is framed, through religion. So, and also at the bottom, it's a very powerful social binder, creating and maintaining group identity. There's all types of studies about the values of belonging to a religious organization. Whether it's going to a mosque regularly, going to a synagogue regularly, going to church regularly, going to temple regularly. There's all types of studies about how that binds people and how they identify with that. So, okay, does anybody have any questions about anything we've gone over so far?
No.
Tish, how about you? You okay?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm just listening.
All right. Okay, so a lot of times you think about humanities, and that's what this is, a humanities course. And you think, oh man, it's books, that's museums, that's old statues and stuff like that. But really, humanities is more than that. Humanities is what makes us what we are. To ensure that ancient Greek stuff has a lot to do with it. Not the Renaissance, the Enlightenment has a lot to do with it. Though that has a lot to do with it. But now people look at humanities, and it's not just the academic part of it. Okay, it's the theater today, it's the music today, it's the literature today. All that is part of the humanities. And Jonathan, even like you mentioned, the manga, okay, that's as much a part of humanities and culture as, say, what the Greek philosophers wrote and said, because that affects how people believe, how they see the world, and that's what makes people anyhow of what makes someone and a culture and people what they are. So we're going to study, we're going to be looking at art, music, theaters, and literature. But we're not just going to be looking at old, dry, dirty, dusty stuff, okay? But we're going to be taking this into the 21st century where we can really see how the humanities makes culture what it is and how it developed the culture that we're in. So what I hope you get out of this 5 weeks is that you become a better citizen of the world, because you understand cultures that are different than yours, and you can see maybe understand why people act the way they do, why they say the things that they do, and things like that, so that you are a better citizen of the world.
I actually have one question, Professor.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about humanities and how through time people have grown up, as far as, from the Greeks to the Romans to through time, we get, people divided themselves, the Germans, the French, then we had conflicts between countries and stuff. Everything comes together. So what is your perspective on certain types of societies? We'll say, how do I word this? So, example, the Freemasons. You have 2 types of Masons.
Mm-hmm.
You have the normal Masons, then you have the Prince Hall Masons. They're 2 completely different societies within one society.
Mm-hmm.
So, in your opinion, how do you think that actually has, as far as an effect on how humanity would either look at that or interact with that? It's just a curiosity of mine.
See, I'm not exactly sure about that example, but I guess what I think about cultures and societies and humanity is that the more information that's readily available, okay, and I hate to say this, but whether it's true or false, is going to change the way that people see the world. And, there are some countries like China and North Korea where you have a very restricted flow of information. It's very censored. Then you have other countries like the United States where, who knows what's true and what's not. And I think that that's really going to change the entire world.
I just because it's interesting how certain things through the centuries have been a mystery to the point where people in general within society are having a specific I can't really say reaction, but a specific, I'm looking for one word that I can't think of, but they're easiest way to say is they're looking at it in one specific way, having a specific set impact. You know what I'm saying, Professor?
Yeah.
So I'm trying to understand by something of that degree or magnitude through time how it's affecting humanity, culture, the history, because even today people are intrigued by certain societies like that.
Right. And I think, as far as like Freemasons, you're talking about a what's generally been considered a secret society.
Right.
And, I don't know, my thought is that you're going to see less and less of that as time goes on.
Right.
Okay. All right. So does anybody, Tish, do you have any questions? No. All right. Jonathan, how about you?
No, I just get intrigued by history. As I said, I've read your introduction. I love history like you, so it's interesting that taking this class, I think it's going to play out as I'm going to learn maybe a different perspective on how history has had an impact on us in the future, as far as what you're saying, culture, identities, and so on and so forth. So I really don't have much question. It's just more just kind of like, to me, what are riddles that I think I'll kind of answer through time, class.
Okay.
Right. I'm with Jonathan. I really don't have any questions, but I mean, it does seem like it'll be an interesting course.
Well, I hope you enjoy it. And if you have any questions or you need any help with anything, my contact information is there. Don't hesitate to get in touch with me, okay? Because I want to see you succeed in the class, and I want to see you do well.
Okay, I do have one question about the assignment that we have. And I know we had to read 3 passages, but can you kind of go over that for a second?
Are you talking about the writing assignment?
On the first assignment, because I already did the discussion board, and then we had to do the reading with the questions at the end, and then we have the first assignment that's due on Sunday, on the 28th.
Okay, let me take a look here. Okay, and log in there.
What you're doing that, not much about one small question. On the introduction about discussions and various things of when things are due and turned in, I've noticed some discussions close on Sunday at 11:59, but at the introduction I was reading that you had written or somebody had written an outline that they are due by Wednesday, and another assignment is due by Thursday, but every assignment says that the closing time is Sunday.
Okay, the course runs from Monday, or each session week from Monday till Sunday at 11:59. For the discussions, are due your initial post by Thursday at 11:59, and then your 2 replies to your classmates are due by Sunday at 11:59. Now, for this first week, there was a knowledge check that was due by Wednesday at 11:59.
Yeah.
And then the essay assignment is due by Sunday at 11:59.
Okay.
Is that essay assignment, is it gonna be like a one-page APA format, etc., basically answering the questions about
Yes.
the passages that we had to read?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I
All
just
right.
want to be sure because, like, as I've informed, my time schedule, class schedule, my schedule's all over the place. So
Mhm.
that's why I wanted to make sure that I had my timelines correct, so I can
Right.
try to get everything on time.
Okay. And like I said, if you aren't going to be able to turn something in on time, let me know ahead of time. And then that way, if I know ahead of time, I can usually, just waive the late points if you tell me ahead of time.
Okay.
Okay, I do have another question.
Mhm.
Is Zoom always gonna be on Wednesdays at 7?
Always on Wednesdays at 7 for the lecture.
Are they
And,
gonna be recorded in case we miss it?
and they are going to be recorded in case you miss it. And then if you do have any questions on Fridays from 9 to 10, I'm going to be on Zoom for an office hour. If you have any questions, you want to talk to me then.
Okay.
Okay?
Fair enough. Fair enough.
All right. Well, it was nice to meet you, and have a good week, okay?
Nice
All
to
right.
meet
Thank you.
you,
You as
sir.
well.
Uh-huh. Bye.
Bye.